Welcome to the Ignited Recovery podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because Ignited Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Addict, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Ignited Recovery Secrets podcast. I'm Addict, and I'm coming here today this is our third episode, and I want to tell you, I talked about this one secret last time, and that is the fact that abstinence should not be the end-all, be-all, first thing and last thing everybody's concerned about recovery regarding. And if you haven't heard that one, please go back and listen. Because what I want to share with you today is another thing that I believe makes Ignited Recovery and this approach so different than the way a lot of other people talk about it. And that is that anyone can beat their addiction. And a lot of people get really weirded out when I say that, because there's this phrase, right? Once an addict, always an addict. We all know the phrase, and you've heard it over and over and over. And I really don't like that phrase all that much. But I want to tell you that when people say that, once an addict, always an addict, I wonder sometimes, what do they mean, right? Like I'm right-handed, but I was born left-handed, and I got kind of altered for that. But Kai, my 8-year-old, he's left-handed, and he's probably going to be left-handed for the rest of his life. What does that mean? Once left-handed, always left-handed, although for me, again, that shifted a little bit early on in life. That means Kai is probably always going to write with his left hand. Now, when we talk about addicts, the way I see it, the reason people even get engaged and getting help, the reason it becomes an important issue in their life is there are life struggles related to their addiction. So if they're addicted to alcohol, then they either drink too much or they do things when they drink that bring them consequences, or maybe they just can't control their drinking and they want to drink less and they're not able to do it. But typically, the way I've seen it, there's stuff that happens, right? Relationship struggles, work consequences, responsibilities that go by the wayside. Now, if that's how we define addiction, are we really saying that once an addict, always an addict? As in, if you're an addict now, if you struggle with alcohol now and all that stuff is happening in your life, that is always going to be the case? Like, if you're left-handed, you will always write with your left hand? I don't think so, right? I think what we're saying is something more like if somebody has cancer, right? Then once a cancer patient or a cancer survivor, always a cancer survivor. Okay, that's one other way of looking at it, right? Because I know a lot of people. I know people who've passed away from cancer, just like I know people who've passed away because of their addiction. But I also know people who beat their cancer, had one occurrence of it, and never had it come back. So, like saying once a cancer survivor, always a cancer survivor, could mean I had cancer 45 years ago, don't have cancer anymore, have had no return of it, and I can still qualify myself as a group. But it's a little bit different than the once an addict, always an addict, right? When the idea is you will always be struggling with this thing. For cancer survivors, sometimes all it means is every 6 months you go for a checkup. Or what about, I had another example that I was thinking of, I deal with a lot of people who had trauma in their past. So what about a shooting survivor, somebody who was somewhere where people got shot and they survived? Once a shooting survivor, always a shooting survivor, right? They're never going to be able to outlive that. That will always be in their past. It's always something they're going to remember, deal with to some extent, but they're not getting shot at all the time, right? They're not just walking around and people are shooting at them all the time. They're not waking up every single night afraid that somebody's going to walk in through the house and shoot them. There are influences and effects and consequences to having had that happen in your life, but you're not dealing with it in every moment. And I think that the problem is we believe that once an addict, always an addict means you're going to struggle with it forever. And if you've listened to any of my stuff before, you know that if you believe that, if you think you're going to be struggling with it all the time and you tell people that, and that's the way people look at you, it's just more likely to happen. And I really do believe that this is one of the reasons why people look at addicts with this pitying sort of approach, and why addicts feel like they have to congregate together and help each other out, because everybody else kind of sees you as hopeless because you've dealt with this in the past. You're going to deal with it forever. And it's one of the things that I hate the most. I've talked about labels and I've talked about all these elements to the way addiction is currently addressed that I just don't like at all. And it's one of the main struggles that I have with the fact that in traditional treatment, you kind of have to get up all the time and recall yourself an addict, right? Hi, my name is Adi and I'm an addict. Now, imagine if you had to do that for everything else in your life. And in addiction, by the way, in addiction treatment, they will tell you front and center, you better make your recovery around this the most important thing in your life, or else you will die or end up in an institution or in jail or something like that. Now, let's go back to that other example, those other examples, right? Like cancer and shooting. Imagine if every time you met somebody, hi, my name is Joey, how are you doing? I'm a cancer survivor. Even if it's been 40 years since they've had any recurrence of cancer, right? Or somebody who, lived in an area where they got shot up when they were younger, and now every single time they met people, every single time they talked about their past, they would identify first as this other kind of person. I think it really isolates you, and it really creates a system where you never feel like you can be like other people. And to make the point, I remember the first 45 minutes that I spent in rehab. If you haven't listened to my story, we'll put the links to the TEDx and all these other things that I've done, because I don't really want to go fully in depth into this. We'll do another episode, I'm sure, where I'll go in depth into it. But the long and short of it is this. I used a lot of drugs from the age of 14 to about my early 20s. And then right around my early 20s, around 21 or 22, I got pretty hooked on meth, which I remained hooked on until I was 24, 25. And it was a problem, right? I mean, by the time I was done, I was using probably $300 to $500 worth of meth every single day, which I could easily support because I was selling it. But my entire life revolved around drugs, alcohol, drug dealing, and that life, right? I hung out with drug dealers, strippers, and drug users. Those were the only people I hung out with ever for like a 4 or 5 year period of my life. I lived on the outskirts of kind of what most people who've never been through this, if you have, this world, call kind of like the underworld. That's where I lived for 5, maybe 6, 7 years out of my life. That all ended with an arrest. And when that arrest happened, I knew that I was addicted to meth. It wasn't that was a question. I told my friends that I'm addicted to meth. That didn't mean I thought of myself as a drug addict, though. And what ended up happening was my lawyer said, look, if you don't go to rehab, if you don't get help for your meth addiction, the judge is going to look at you, see no potential in your future, and just sentence you to like the 13, 15, 18 years or whatever you're facing. At my house, just to give you an idea, they found about 7,000 ecstasy pills, I believe a few ounces of coke, a few ounces of meth, LSD, GHB. I mean, they found a lot of drugs, right? I was going away for a long time. They found a lockpick kit. They found I had a gun. They found a lot of things that were going to land me in jail for a long time, close to 2 decades. And so my lawyer said that to me, and I said, cool, let's go right to rehab. He said, let's just get this treatment and you'll be fine. Now, I went because my lawyer told me to. I went because I saw that as the easiest way to not spend 13 years in prison. I wasn't going to snitch. I wasn't going to do any of those other things that they wanted me to do. I was going to serve time. I knew that for sure. But I wanted to make it as little as possible. So off to rehab I went. As soon as I walked in, they checked my stuff. They search it. My quote-unquote girlfriend at the time dropped me off, and I went in, and there was a group running. So as soon as I did the intake interview, they showed me to a room where there was a group sitting around, and as I was the new guy, I was to introduce myself to the group. And so what did that mean? It meant I walked into the middle of the circle, and the group leader, one of the counselors, asked me, why are you here? And I said what every normal human being would say. I said, well, I was arrested and my lawyer really recommended I go to rehab. And he said, no, that's not why you're here. And I said, well, I've been using a lot of meth for the last 5 years and I want to quit. That's not why you're here. Well, my parents found out about all my drug use and they're really disappointed, and I want to stop this so I can make them happy. That's not why you're here. And I just kept trying to come up with reasons. And what felt like 45 minutes, but honestly, guys, was probably 5 to 10 minutes, but of being drilled like this in the middle of a group of people I'd never met before, the guy finally graciously gave me the answer. And the answer is, he said, you're an addict, that's why you're here. And so I learned the language, right? And from that moment, every meeting, we went to 1 or 2 meetings every day. At every meeting, I'd say, my name is Adi and I'm an addict. Eventually, I went to a group that wanted me to only call myself an alcoholic because all addicts are alcoholics, etc. It's the semantics of whatever it is that you are doing your recovery around. But every day, I would have to repeat that multiple times from that moment. Now, I'm a pretty rebellious, kind of standoffish guy who tries to do things his own way. I did that. Failed out of that first rehab, ended up in another rehab after a few months where I actually managed to stay sober. But it always really bothered me later, after I cleaned up my act and left the recovery community, that happened, right? That I was kind of made to take on this personality, and I was an asshole drug dealer. Well, I was kind of a nice drug dealer, but I was an asshole who like sold a lot of drugs to people, made money that way, and used drugs all day, every day, right? I mean, there was a lot of stuff I needed to fix in my life, there's no doubt. But this whole notion that I'm this person, once an addict, always an addict, and I'm always going to be in this other group, I'm never going to be normal, really bothered the hell out of me. And I know a lot of people now that it bothers the hell out of. And the reason I want to tell this story and kind of really get you guys to understand how impactful that is we know that when we take on these personal identifications, we project what that means for our future. And if we don't believe in goals that we're going to have, and this is something we worked on in Ignited Recovery all the time with people, if we don't believe there's an outcome available for us, we're never going to see evidence that we can succeed. We'll never be motivated to pursue that goal, and therefore we'll never get there. And so a lot of addicts put to the wayside today, they kind of push aside any hopes, big dreams, and goals for the future, because once an addict, always an addict. Whereas if that shift in thinking happened a little bit of, okay, well, what if being once an addict is like being a cancer survivor? Like, what if I can go through this period where I struggled with addiction and then I can just fix it and just beat it forever, right? People beat cancer all the time. People survive shootings and then go on to pretty normal freaking lives all the time. What is it that makes addiction so special? So let me just tell you, first of all, that according to research, at least on alcohol, where we have huge numbers, we're not that special. I write about this in the book. If you haven't picked up the Abstinence Myth book, please do. But in the book, I talk about research that shows that, let's say around alcohol strugglers, people who struggle with alcohol and have drinking problems, even the people who met at the time what was called alcohol dependent, which is what we think of as alcoholics, criteria, on average, they met it for one period in their life for about 4 years. Kind of like my meth addiction that lasted about 5 years, right? Around 4 years. So 3 years would still qualify, 2.5 would qualify, 6, 7 years would still qualify, but it's kind of in that range. One episode. That was about 75% of the people who struggled. Another 25% or so of people struggle for about 4 or 5 periods lasting 4 or 5 years each. So those people are struggling for 25, 30. Those are more the kind of people that we think of as alcoholics, the people who struggle long term. But first of all, notice that we don't have any way ahead of time to figure out who are the people who will fall in that chronic group. We can't tell them apart in the beginning. So when somebody is first struggling, what we tend to do now, actually what a lot of people do now, is they just assume that if you're struggling right now, you're going to be one of those people who struggles for the rest of your life. Even though about 3/4 of people, that's just not true for. I mean, like, come on, let's be honest. I wrote an article on Psychology Today called 2 Kinds of Alcoholic, Chronic and College. And a lot of people who go to college drink like crazy. People who go to the military drink like crazy for a short period of time. They actually kind of look like alcoholics during that time period. And the reason I'm stressing that is when I tell people my story now, so again, that was the background, but now I'm not sober. I drink socially. I've tried weed a couple of times. If you listen to the podcast I've done with Sophie, which is every Wednesday, it's more around relationships. If you don't, please do go and listen. We talked about the fact that we've done Molly a couple of times to really help her with some of her struggles around sexual trauma and some of the things we've gone through, etc. That's 15, 16 years away from me doing meth. I never touched meth once, although Stanton Peele, who's a guy we're going to have on the show in a couple of weeks, reminded me that I've taken Adderall pills a few times for my ADHD. And so Adderall and meth are not all that different. I haven't relapsed on meth. I honestly still have my prescription for Adderall from a couple of years ago because I take it so rarely. The point is this. When I tell people that recovery story, what a lot of people tell me is one of two things. Either A, I'm an addict in relapse and I should be careful because I'm going to take everybody else down with me, or maybe I was never an addict in the first place. Kind of like what I was saying before about those people who only struggle with alcohol problems for about 4 years and then fix it, just figure it out. And what I tell those people that tell me maybe I was never an addict, I say, where the hell were you 16 years ago when I was sent to rehab? Nobody said to me back then, hey, you use about $400 or $500 worth of meth every day, you're smoking up a storm, and all you do is surround yourself with drug users all day. And that was, by the way, only my meth use. I used ecstasy and GHB and acid and mushrooms all the time and ketamine. Nobody back then was willing to say to me, but maybe this is just a phase. everybody, like those first 45 minutes in treatment, were very happy to tell me right away that I'm here because I'm an addict. So what does once an addict, always an addict really mean, other than you struggle with addiction at some point in time and that will always be a part of your life? Because I got to tell you, now having done this work for almost coming up on 2 decades, I've seen success stories that'll blow your mind, right? I've seen people succeed beating their addiction. And when I say beating their addiction, I mean having terrible addiction issues at some point in time and then being later on in a phase in their life where they have no addiction struggles anymore. I'm not saying they're perfect humans. I'm not saying their life becomes perfect. They still have maybe depression and anxiety issues that they have to work on, or maybe some impulsivity stuff, or maybe they're just sometimes unhappy or have work issues or relationship problems. That's just life. That's not addiction. That's just life. But when it comes to their addiction, they're not a problem anymore. Now, I talk about a lot of these in this free online workshop that I give that we will put a link for in here on Ignited Recovery, but let me just give you some of the examples. Like, for instance, Melissa, a woman I talk about in that long hour and a half long workshop, who struggled with early sexual abuse, traumatic family surroundings, bullying when she was younger because some weight problems, all the way to the point where she came to me with, literally 6 addiction criteria. I mean, 6 mental health criteria. So 3 addictions: alcohol, marijuana, and nitrous oxide, but then bipolar disorder, borderline disorder, and generalized anxiety disorder. The girls in graduate school right now, it's 7 years later, but 6 years later, the girls in graduate school right now, meeting criteria for none of those things. I've met women who were abused heavily early on in life, deal with the trauma, deal with what's going on after coming to me because they were drinking themselves, to oblivion every single day of the week, and they're fine. One of the clients, one of my favorite stories from the Ignited Recovery kind of environment, the group and the course and all those things, was a daily blackout drinker who'd been to 4 treatment episodes before. He was a gay boy, grew up in Texas, and you can imagine growing up in Texas, he's about my age or a little bit older, growing up in Texas in the 70s being gay, not a good scene, right? So he did what he had to do to fit in, and drinking became a huge part of that for him. Life is not perfect now, but he drinks rarely and sporadically, and most of the time it's just fine, and he still has things to address, but he kind of beat his addiction, and it's been a couple of years, right? Like, why is it that we stress to people who struggle with drug and alcohol issues so much that they're always going to suffer? And what if, because we tell them that, is why they can't get it out of their head, because now they've got that voice in the back of their head, you're always going to be like this, it's always hopeless, you're never going to win. I'm telling you right now, I've seen people, not just through Ignited Recovery, the rehab that I used to run and co-founded, and through Smart Recovery and AA, I've seen people beat their addiction completely, just beat it. I'm not going to say cure, because I don't even know what that means, because then you have to make it a disease. I'm saying they beat it. It was done, it was over, and now they went on to essentially normal life. Just normal everyday life with the ups and downs that come with everyday life. So I'm not suggesting this is true. There's research evidence, I've seen it, and I've heard stories, and I'm living it myself. I know this is true. Anybody can beat their addiction. As I talk about in the book, the question becomes about, can you get deep inside, understand with some help sometimes, the reason why it is that you're struggling? Can you then accept those reasons, because fighting against them is not really all that helpful? And can you figure out the way to move forward? If you can do those steps, those are kind of the 3 principles of Ignited Recovery: is honest exploration, radical acceptance, and individualized transformation. If you can do that process, anybody who wants to can end up beating their addiction. Now, I mentioned the book a couple of times. We'll put a link up. I just got an email from somebody just the other day, a woman who told me that her husband, in a day and a half, I made this book short. It's about 130 pages, and I did that on purpose. This woman just wrote me. She said her husband's been trying traditional AA-based kind of recovery for a while. It didn't work for him, and so he was looking for something else. Read the book in a week and a half, in a day and a half, and they're already feeling completely differently about his struggles, and he's feeling hopeful, and they're doing work that they've never done before. The goal of Ignited Recovery, and while we have the Ignited Recovery Secrets podcast and the course and the Facebook group and everything, is to help people find ways to get their life back, or to create a new life that they've never had before. If you know somebody who's struggling, or if you are struggling yourself and you don't really know what to do about it, hit us up. Ignited on Instagram or on Facebook. We have an Ignited Recovery group. I have my page, Dr. D. Jaffe page on Facebook. I can't even say my own name. And we've got this podcast. Just get in touch. It is not hopeless. You're not helpless, but you need to understand what to do. And sometimes that requires guidance, and that is okay. We're going to talk in another episode about how everybody needs help. It's just part of life. It's not about you being broken. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please connect with us. If you love this podcast, leave us a 5-star review, and a 5-star rating and a review. We would love that. Thank you so much. Thanks for tuning in. We will see you Wednesday with Sophie. Bye. Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you, so please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.